Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Watch as we continue our daily coverage of the Alex Ewing trial. And this will be the trial that we're tracking on a day-to-day basis with Kevin Vaughn, our 911 Snow investigative reporter, who's on the ground. We'll be tracking this and taking you through this trial every day, as well as our director of investigative journalism, Nicole Vatt, who joins us for some more insight as well. Just for a quick recap, this is the trial of the gruesome 1984 murder of Deborah and Bruce Bennet and their 7-year-old daughter Melissa. And their 3-year-old daughter Vanessa was critically injured, and she testified today. So that's the overview on it. Now joined by Kevin and Nicole, as I just mentioned. And Kevin, I'm going to toss things out to you since you were at the courthouse today. You mentioned to me on email before we got this going here what you described as the haunting detail from Connie Bennett, who is Bruce Bennett's mother, who first discovered the murder here back in 1984. Kevin, just give us an idea of what we saw earlier on here at the courthouse today.
Connie's 87 years old. She was the first witness called by the prosecution, and she basically walked the jury through what happened on January 16th, 1984, the day she drove to that house and went inside and found her son murdered. And just her emotion, talking about discovering his body and just collapsing onto the floor next to it. It was, the word I used earlier was haunting. It was haunting testimony that the jurors heard before from Connie Bennett.
Kevin, it's 37 years they've been waiting to get on the stand and talk about this and look across the room to see the person accused of doing the most horrific thing. And they sat in the courtroom all day and also watched the other testimony. Could you get a sense of what they were what was going through their minds, or was there emotion? What was happening?
Connie was very poised both before and after her testimony. She stayed in the courtroom all afternoon. Vanessa was very poised both before her testimony and on the stand. She was only asked a handful of questions. There was no cross-examination. She left the courtroom after that testimony, and I think it's probably because she was told that there was going to be a lot of testimony about what happened to her sister coming up after her. So she was not there for the last couple of hours today. But, Connie, as she was talking about her son Bruce, the photographs of his body were being shown to the jury. And it was, it's just a moment. I don't think anybody who wasn't there could understand. And it was just shocking, to see the pictures. Doesn't matter how many times you've read court documents, what happened when you actually see the photographs, it's a different experience. And she broke down a couple of times, but she got through it and did a good job. And I admire her. 3 years ago, when Alex Ewing was identified as a suspect, she told me, "I've always hoped that I would live long enough to see somebody arrested and charged and taken to trial." And today, she got to see that.
I was thinking about that interview when you were texting me today, and you mentioned the crime scene photos. And we see a lot of things. You've seen a lot of things. We've seen a lot of crime scene pictures. They're always hard, but you said these were particularly hard today.
Yeah. First of all, one of the victims here was a 7-year-old girl, and seeing photos of what was done to her was very hard. Just the brutality of what was done to Bruce and Deborah Bennett as well, and it's obvious that Bruce Bennett fought for his life, and it's also obvious that Melissa fought. She had injuries to her hands, and just thinking about what they went through in their final moments, it's just a numbing feeling. And these pictures were as more horrific, I think, than anything I've seen, and I've seen a lot of horrific things over the years in this business. So that was powerful, and I can only imagine what the jurors were thinking as they were seeing it.
It has to be super emotional for them, but you also talked in your 5 o'clock story about a firefighter who was there and he broke down.
He broke down when they first got to the home. It was obvious right away that Bruce Bennett was dead, and several firefighters testified, and they all sort of told the same story. The first one was very powerful in the telling of this, and it was that Connie said, "Where are my babies?" And they realized there were other people in the house, and so these firefighters split up. One of them went downstairs; nobody was down there. The others went upstairs. They went into the master bedroom, and they found Deborah Bennett deceased there, and then they went into the bedroom that the two girls shared, and they found Melissa Bennett deceased on the floor. And then they saw there was a teddy bear on the other bed, and one of them realized that there was a child behind that teddy bear, kind of against the wall. And he went over and he was reaching to touch her to check her vital signs because he thought that she was probably dead as well. And she took a breath, and he was very emotional in the telling of that story. And firefighters are on they're first responders that see terrible things on a regular basis for the job. And all of these firefighters were 25 and 30, and in one case, I think a 37-year veteran. So they'd seen a lot of stuff, and they were obviously all, uh, you know, what they saw that day left an indelible imprint on all of them.
For people who haven't been able to look back like we have so far, we have stories from the early 80s on our website on 9news.com/blame. There's a timeline of the case, but there's also these stories. And when you're talking about the firefighters, so many people were touched by this. The doctors that did interviews every day about how Vanessa was doing. And there was one story in particular Connie is in, talking about how grateful she was that Vanessa survived. And here she was today walking into that courtroom. That must have been a moment.
Oh, absolutely. And seeing her and Connie together, we've documented this. They've had an at times difficult relationship. Vanessa lives in Arizona, and Connie lives here, and so they don't see each other a lot. And it was pretty powerful to see them walking down the hall today, heading into court together. And yeah, it was a moment. I said hello to Vanessa just briefly during a break, and she's despite the difficulties in her life, she's a very sweet person. Her first words were, "How are you doing?" So that was something. And like I said, she told the jury about her injuries, which included really serious head injuries. She's got a brain injury. She was bashed in the head with a hammer. She pretty matter of factly walked through that, and then she was asked if she remembered anything about the attack, remembered seeing anybody, and she said both times, she had no memories of what happened. So that's probably a good thing, I would think.
Yeah, it is. It's probably a good thing. You also think how impacted her life has been by this. And
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
talked to her for 5 minutes and
I remember when we interviewed her in 2018 down in Arizona. I asked her if it was overstating it to say that every day of her life she feels the effects of what happened to her on that day back in 1984, and she totally agreed that her life was set on a different trajectory by this attack on her, and she's had a lot of issues as a result of it, and she's fighting to overcome them. And like I said, it's powerful to me that she came here and testified today, and that she sat through most of the day's testimony, and that she sat in the room with the man accused of doing this to her. It was something.
wrap up. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of what's to come, what's coming up tomorrow?
Um, the last two witnesses today were police officers. The first officer on scene, and then an officer who documented all of the various rooms in the house and all of the evidence and stuff photographically. And I think we're going to expect a parade of officers to get at the specific pieces of evidence the prosecution is going to build their case on. The carpeting that was beneath Vanessa Bennett's body and the comforter that was covering it. The prosecutors, made it known in their opening statement that they have multiple DNA samples from both of those things that match Alex Ewing, and so I think to establish to the jury the strength of that evidence, I think we're going to hear from a lot of police officers that were involved in collecting that evidence, packaging that evidence, and over the years, taking it out and having it tested. Remember, 1984, there was no such thing as DNA testing, at least not in practical use. It was a concept in the minds of scientists, but it wasn't being used then. And so, it was some years later that some of this evidence was tested and DNA samples were obtained. And some years after that, even better, more complete samples were obtained. So I think that's likely to be what we're going to hear a lot of in the next couple of days is building that case. How did they get all the evidence collected, store it, test it, etc.?
Yeah, so Chris, we're going to be going through this every day. Not every day will be this emotional. I bet tomorrow will be too, though. Even though police officers can kind of get hardened sometimes, they're also they live some of these cases, and I know the ones that we've talked to in the past have said that. But if you want daily updates about this and you want to find out more about what's happening at noon or whatever time tomorrow, just text BLAME to 303-871-1491.
Absolutely, and thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Nicole. Incredibly powerful testimony. The sound of it here in the case of Alex Ewing is being accused of gruesome murders. And again, appreciate a few minutes of your time there. Again, we do have that phone number that you mentioned, 303-871-1491. You text that and you'll get those frequent updates. And also, we do have the 11-part podcast, Blame the Fear All These Years. It's available on Apple Podcasts and also over at 9news.com/blame. Again, these will be daily updates. So Kevin and Nicole, we'll see you again here tomorrow. And appreciate for all of you tuning in.
Thanks, Chris.